Here we see a CIA article. I mean, New York Times article. I always get those mixed up. They go into detail in this article. See the headline? It says "Screams Without Words: How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence on October 7th." Because if there's one thing we've learned from the burning of the Reichstag in the last century is that you need a flimsy excuse to launch a genocide against a group of people who had nothing to do with the attack. The slack-jawed dopes of the world were just going to go along with it because they go along with whatever the New York Times or the man on the television tells them. I mean, after COVID, it's just amazing how people just go. I had people quoting these stupid stories to me at Christmas parties. If the guy on the television told them, hey, it's unhealthy to keep breathing, they would sit down and stop breathing and say, sorry, the doctor on the TV knows more about this than you do. And then they would just pass out. So look, there's a little bit of the story. One family knew exactly who she was, Gail Adush, a mother of two from working-class town in central Israel, who disappeared from the rave that night with her husband, based largely on the video evidence. The whole point of this, it's false. I'm sorry, I buried the lead. This New York Times story has been now completely debunked. And by who? By the woman they say... Here we go. Based largely on the video evidence, which was verified by the New York Times, Israeli police officials said they believe that Miss Abdush was raped, and she has become a symbol of the horrors visited upon Israeli women and girls during the October 7th attacks. Okay. Israeli officials say that everywhere Hamas terrorists struck, the rave, the military bases along the Gaza border, and the kibbutzim, they brutalized women. A 2-month investigation by the New York Times uncovered painful new details, establishing that the attacks against women were not isolated events, but part of a broader pattern of gender-based violence on October 7th. Well, here's Aaron Mate, a major embarrassment for the New York Times and his story, this guy Gettleman, on how Hamas weaponized sexual violence. Gal Adbush is the October 7th victim whose story leads and is featured throughout the New York Times article. Her family is even featured as the cover image. New York Times describes her as the symbol of October 7th sexual violence. But here's the problem. Her sister says there is no proof that there was a rape. She also accuses the New York Times of manipulating their family. They didn't know that she would be presented as a rape victim in the story.
What, they're not happy about that? That they just threw in she was raped on top of it being blown up?
In other words, the New York Times weaponized both a dead woman and sexual violence to spread propaganda in service of a genocide in Palestine. Wow. Max Blumenthal. The Times must issue a retraction and punish this guy Gettleman who wrote this article and his colleagues if he cannot discredit the IG comment below by Merle Alter, a parent sister of Gal Abdush. That's the woman they said was raped. At the Gray Zone, I demonstrated months ago that Abdush had been killed by an explosion on October 7th and was not raped. See here, and he gives a link to that story where he debunked it. That explosion arrived either through an Israeli Hellfire missile or a Hamas RPG. Oddly, the New York Times did not show the image clearly demonstrating that Abdush suffered severe burns on her head and was likely in a state of rigor mortis when she was found. For some reason, the Times also neglected to publish the names of Abdush's sisters. This is literally from the article. It says the trauma from sexual assault can be so heavy that sometimes survivors do not speak about it for years. Several rape counselors said, many people are looking for the golden evidence of a woman who will testify about what happened to her, but don't look for that. So don't look for evidence. That's what they're saying. They're saying, this is what the New York Times is saying. They're saying, don't look for evidence that this actually happened.
The golden evidence of someone saying they were raped.
Yes.
That's this. Wow.
Well, that's how they operate. They are going to put people in a position where if you ask about it, you're guilty. To ask
Yes.
about it is the crime.
No, I
to
know.
demand
I
the
experienced that in
You're
2015.
re-traumatizing
Yes, I
the
was told
women
that.
by asking that.
I was told that. And then
And
I was told, oh, you don't want women to tell their story. No, tell me the story. Just to say, oh, it happened and no other. That is all.
And so here, look, they say the director of the rape crisis centers in Israel said the corpses tell the story.
No, they literally don't.
That's like the measuring stick they used for COVID. Oh, the COVID deaths tell the story. And then you find out that they were saying everybody died from COVID.
Right. Yeah.
And even if you got in a car accident and you had COVID, you die, you're a COVID death. We found all that kind of crazy stuff out. And here, Max Blumenthal says, I have also debunked the testimonies of other key eyewitnesses in the New York Times investigation, showing how their narratives either changed dramatically over time or were transparently fake. Several New York Times sources previously spread disinformation about Hamas throwing dead babies in trash cans, beheading babies, and cutting a fetus from a pregnant woman. And he gives a link to that. So unless the New York Times can show that the Instagram post in question was somehow fabricated, or that Merle Alter is not the sister of Gal Abdush, its story will be remembered as one of the most repugnant journalistic hoaxes in recent years. So again, the people spreading misinformation and lies is the New York Times. It's not YouTubers. The people spreading the most dangerous pro-war propaganda lies, again, is your trusted news organizations. And here it is, breaking. Gal Abdu's sister denies rape claims, a New York Times article, and says the New York Times manipulated the family. They had no knowledge that the article was going to be about rape and were under the impression it was going to be about Gal Abdu's memory.
But just being blown up isn't enough to feel bad for her.
Right?
You had to make it really sex it up with some fake rape.
Well, and how horrific to do that to a grieving family.
Yeah.
So here's the post. So the woman in the black dress is my sister. I really failed to understand all the media reports surrounding the story, and why I say because there were so many more hard cases. So why exactly her story? All because of one video that was distributed without the knowledge of the family, without permission, mentioning that there are children in the story, and it is not of interest to anyone. In the correct video, the appearance is not easy, but it is clear that the dress will be up and not in a normal way. The head is half burned because they threw a grenade on the car so that it won't look like I justify what they did there. The scum did much worse deeds. Yes, they tried. Yes, they cut off heads and parts of bodies. But in this case of my sister is not. And why not at 6:51, Gail sends us a message to the WhatsApp group. We're on the border. You don't understand what's going on. What explosives are there? We'll get out of here. At 7 o'clock, my brother-in-law calls his brother and says that they were shot in the wave. She is grunking how in 4 minutes they also raped and burned. True, my brother-in-law was completely burned, but she was not raped just because there are no medical sheets and tests which prove that she had been raped, mentioning that in the New York Times that came to us indicated that they wanted to do a story in memory of Gal and Nagy, and that's why we approved. If we knew that it was going to be a headline like Rape Slaughter, we would never have agreed to mention that. And so the reason why this is a little awkward, because this is a translation.
Yeah.
So there it is.
I think in the picture she was pretty, and that's why they did that. The New York Times, they go, we want to use her as the face of it because I think.
So is this?
Yeah. So because it was somebody pretty, that's what they did to like jazz up the story. I mean, this girl just thought they were talking about her sister, like the memory of her dying.
Yes.
Like, and she was raped.
So here's Max Blumenthal says Israel's Ynet reported on December 31st that Abdush's mother was first told her daughter had been raped when the New York Times approached her with its story. We didn't know about the rape at first. We only knew when the New York Times reporter contacted us. They said they cross-examined the evidence and said that gal had been sexually assaulted. Until now, we don't know what exactly happened, which means that the Israeli government, with all its resources in forensic pathology and desperation to exhibit Hamas atrocities, had not even come to the conclusion the New York Times was so eager to draw about Abdush's killing. The Facebook account of Merle Alter confirms that she is indeed the sister of Gal Abdush. There are other photos too, but I won't post them out of respect for privacy. So the sister. Anyway, so there you go. Some more garbage from the New York, some more pro-war garbage from the New York Times.
This is like the beheading 40 babies.
Yes.
You have to make it stupid.
Well, they're getting desperate because people can see that this is a genocide in real time, that this is a modern day crime against humanity, a modern day Wounded Knee. And not coincidentally, they're desperate to maintain the kind of tropes that allowed Wounded Knee to occur.
Yeah,
it's the savage natives. Yeah. It's the savage natives.
They called them savages.
They cut babies out of stomachs.
Yeah.
When you hear stories like this, yes, there are monsters in the world, but generally when you hear things like that, particularly in a situation like this where the power imbalance is so great and the injustice committed against the people is so obvious, you have to be skeptical as soon as you hear it. And as soon as we heard this, we said, look, we can't dismiss it out of hand, but it's 40 beheaded babies. Like, really?
Sounds
Did
like a
that
fable.
really happen?
They didn't hang them on clotheslines either.
Like, this just sounds too much like, oh, the savage Indians on the frontier. It just tracks
exactly
with those
like
kinds
that.
of stories
too
closely.
And so the New York Times can't let it go. They can't let go of this narrative of the babies in ovens and decapitated and the Hamas raping. And I mean, at least Amber Heard knows when to quietly bow out of the scene and start the car. But we're talking about genocide here in the New York Times narrative, and they can't let it go.
Well, in this case, it's Israel that shit the bed.
Yeah.
I mean, so the Israeli government didn't say that she was raped. The New York Times added.
The New York Times
The
did.
New York Times
I'm
did.
continually amazed how much more honest the Israeli news is than the American one.
American news.
And I think it's because they didn't have, all this, like, I told you, Hamas killed wokeness. That's what that Harvard professor being gone, I called it, right? What happened? This is the end of woke. In Israel, because it's been a worse than apartheid place, they haven't had to have any of that nonsense there. There's no wokeness in Israel. So all of their representatives don't know how to talk to us here. And they have to have American media people like run interference and give you a whole different, like translate it and just put nonsense in it.
I think they just replaced Regev with a woman.
Regev?
The guy they kept sending out who seemed like Dracula's assistant.
The women are as
kept
bad
defending their policy.
The woman was the one I said Dresden. That was the first one I saw. We played it on here. And I'm so like naive. I thought that they were mad that someone had compared what they're doing to Dresden.
No, they were saying.
And then I watch, I'm like, oh, we have to do a Dresden.
Well, because if the whole myth of Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East, if that collapses, that is a big collapse in the entire narrative of the establishment. That is a big undermining of their myth of how the world. Yeah, the only safe place for Jews.
They have fire rapes there, according to these people. Yeah.
Israel does not make Jews more safe. It makes them less safe because it generates antagonism against Jews that would not exist without Israel.
Come see us do a live stand-up show. We'll be in Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to Europe. Do you live in Europe? We're going to be there. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.